Welcome to the Work is Weird Now podcast. Whether you're nearing retirement, entering the workforce for the first time, or caught somewhere in the confusing muddle in the middle, you're likely sensing it and you're probably living it. We know we are, and we want to know why. Listen in as we interview experts and everyday people like you to find out how best to navigate the ever-growing weirdness of work in the modern age.
Hi everyone, I'm delighted to introduce today's guest, Jess Rad, and just a little bit of background information about how I discovered Jess. So as we've covered in previous episodes, I took the leap of faith out of the corporate world last year into starting up my own marketing consultancy. And a part of that was I signed up to tons of local events down here in Brighton. And I found an event that was being hosted in a co-working space, and Jess was speaking at that event. Now, sadly, I didn't manage to get a ticket, but I knew that I'd want to hear more from Jess, and I followed her on LinkedIn and her company, the Womenhood. So she covers so many interesting topics, and I knew that she'd be a fantastic guest for Work is Weird Now. And here we are today. So welcome, Jess.
Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Great. So we start every podcast episode with your weird work moment of the week. So I will go first. And mine's actually from last week because we're recording on a Tuesday, which is new for us. We're normally Friday people. But last week I presented to just under 500 people, which was by far the most people I have ever presented to in my life. And it was terrifying. Terrifying and exhilarating all rolled into one. But thankfully it was on Teams, and I could only really see 4 people down the side of my presentation, so I just pretended that there was 4 of them.
Nice.
Alice, what's yours?
So my weird work moment is a bit of an anomaly for me because I tend to be a little bit, admittedly, head in sand when it comes to the financial aspects of running a business. It's certainly not my forte. I know I could be a lot stronger in this regard. And so what I do at a bare minimum is manage to speak to my accountant every year and make sure that I'm doing what I can to be as efficient and smart about running my business as possible. I've just got off the phone with him, which has brought me to this interview in a little bit of a headspace like, but yes, it is an important part of running a business, and one that we probably don't talk enough about, Dan, but is actually probably essential to many people that would be listening. So
Is that a future episode in the making? If there are any accountants listening, reach out.
it's like my nightmare, but yes, it should be. It really should be. So
Thank
how
you.
about you, Jess?
I think my weird work moment was today. I was going to use last night. I think I probably have daily weird work moments these days, to be honest. But today I've been emailed by Amaze, who I'm an ambassador for, amazing Send charity down here in Sussex, asking if I can go on TV tomorrow for BBC South East to comment on the spring statement and the potential changes to the disability allowances and PIP, but it's my birthday tomorrow. So my response is, I'm not sure if I can because I'm going to be in a sauna. So we shall see. That's a weird one for me.
Maybe bringing you live to the BBC from the sauna.
Yeah. I think they wanted to see my reaction as I don't know if I want to be all hot and sweaty. So we'll see. I don't know if I'll do that or not yet, but that's definitely a new one for me.
Well, what a call up, and happy birthday, of course.
Thank
Happy
you.
birthday.
So the next question that we always ask our guests is, are you where you thought you'd be in your career right now?
I was thinking about this morning and I'm thinking in some ways, no, definitely not, because early in my career, I kind of realized I definitely don't want to own my own business because that's going to be too much hard work. Because my dad is a bit of a serial entrepreneur and he worked hard. I'm one of 6, so you kind of have to work hard if you got 6 kids to provide for. So I always thought, well, I'll get to like marketing director, but I never want to get above that because it'll be too much hard work and I'll never own my own business. But simultaneously, yeah, if you ask kind of me of a few years ago, this is exactly where I hoped I would be. And I feel so blessed and excited to be right here, right now, doing work that I absolutely love. And I think I've always had this kernel of unwavering self-belief that, yeah, I was put on this planet to talk about certain things and have a certain impact. And so I feel grateful to be doing it. So yeah, it's a bit of a mix for me.
Amazing. So tell us about the Womenhood, but also tell us about that transition that you went from, you mentioned being marketing director to going into that.
So the Womanhood is a platform that seeks to close the gender gaps by destigmatizing the unspoken challenges of womanhood. So we explore topics across women's health, neurodiversity, money, Alice, and relationships. So we deliver talks and workshops and programs in often quite big businesses. I have lots of associate speakers that have like deep knowledge and expertise in some of those areas, and I talk a lot about them as well. And we walk people through the framework of knowledge mindset toolkit often to like help raise awareness of challenges that lots of people, including women themselves, often and minoritized genders aren't aware of, like undiagnosed neurodiversity or menopause. Uh, and then shift our perspective on them so that we feel good about them often and then get into action. So it's often about looking at what's the 1% change that we can leave with today and really try and cement some practicalities before we leave everyone. I'm not really interested in these passive webinars where you just tune in while you eat your lunch and then forget about it afterwards. Um, so yeah, and then I'm bringing back community events now. So that's how it started back in 2019 with a series of events called the Unspoken Sessions, which I'll come back to in a minute. But I'm bringing those back next month with NeuroCurios. So that's all about uncovering and celebrating ADHD and autism in females, because I think that without that critical part of the puzzle about who you are and your identity, like you're kind of walking through life blind, but there's still a lot of stigma, sadly, I would say, particularly around autism. ADHD feels like it's got the label of the socially acceptable face of neurodiversity now, but I think we need to still work pretty hard about autism, and the two often come hand in hand, to be honest. So yeah, I'm really excited. It's just launching this week. Tickets launching this week to go in that platform 9, that co-working space, and bring people together.
Amazing.
So my background though is marketing. So I worked in TV and film for about 12 years at Disney, BBC, 20th Century Fox. I think it was like one of those jobs that loads of people felt really envious of, and it did feel like, you get to go to red carpet events, and I've dealt with a lot of fun talent and had a lot of amazing experiences. But I think every time you have a child, certainly that was always the catalyst for, what's is this where I should be? What am I doing? You kind of start to rethink life. And I'd already moved to Brighton when I was working for a big business, big studio, and I wanted to go flexibly working, and that just wasn't the done thing back in 2013. Certainly not for who I was working for. So, yeah, I quit and then ended up moving agency side and working locally. And then I had another child, and again, that was another catalyst of like the businesses I were working for basically became smaller and smaller, some of the biggest companies in the country probably, and then moving down to like really small businesses. So I ended up running an animation studio and building a brand strategy consultancy, working 3 days a week with two young kids. And my husband at the time was traveling, and not traveling, but he was in London, so I felt like a single parent. And then my period stopped out of nowhere. So I went from like a 26-day cycle to about 45 days without a period. And I had this really important conversation with my most spiritual friend at the time. She just said very calmly, "Well, it makes sense, Jess. You're in limbo in your work because you know that you're not doing what you want to be doing. And you're in limbo in your marriage because that wasn't going very well. And now your body's in limbo." And I just thought, yeah, that makes total sense. It was like the universe had done everything to try and wake me up. And then finally, it had gone to the nth degree of stopping my body working to really make me pay attention. And so I was in the middle of a big project, but I quit my job with nothing to go to. And out of that, the womanhood was born.
So, am I right in saying that overall the UK's gender pay gap has been gradually narrowing? So, year on year, we've been seeing improvement on that front.
Yes, but we've still got a long way to go. You see lots of
Yeah.
different figures, to be honest, depending on how you count the data. We just did a great session on this, on the global gender gaps for a big company. And it was so brilliant to be in that space and having that conversation, because it was a business that hasn't yet necessarily resolved it themselves. And that's what you find, is that people are kind of on the periphery of these things and not necessarily wanting to dive in because they haven't sewn it up themselves yet. But I think it shows the most courage when you're happy to start, prompting those conversations, knowing that you've got a way to go yet.
I also have read that the disparity remains most pronounced among employees over 40. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on why you think that is, or because obviously there are some employment related matters that would impact that in terms of what positions women are holding and that sort of thing. But also, obviously, you've got a take on systemic things that are holding women back, maybe at that age and above as well. So, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I would suggest that big things like our hormones, we've had a bit of a menopause revolution since 2021 of, menopause has been happening since the beginning of time, but in the last 4 years, we've all really understood that that's a reality for lots of us. And of course, it makes life relatively untenable. I got diagnosed with premature menopause at 38, and it was pre the revolution. So I'd literally just heard the word perimenopause. I didn't know anything about it. And it was still very stigmatized. To go on HRT was a really, really big deal. And I mean, that happened for me, thinking about it, in lockdown. So I'd quit my job with nothing to go to and was trying to build. I didn't even know if that was going to be a business at the time. I can only imagine, and obviously I've heard many, many stories of having to do that when you're being employed by someone else and you're kind of at their mercy, and not necessarily getting your needs met. And again, that's often what you find, is that, women are not able to get to those leadership positions. They're having to leave because their needs are not understood or accommodated. So I'd suggest that's a big one. I think the fact that we are in that sandwich generation of caring, that I wish I had all the stats to mind. My brain doesn't retain all those figures that well, but uh, you know, caring for elderly parents, caring for children. I feel like we've got a bit of a mental health crisis happening in our children. Obviously, adolescence is a very topical conversation at the moment. I haven't quite brought myself to watch it yet. I have to watch it with somebody else, otherwise I don't think I'm going to be able to sleep at night. And that is worth, I'm sure it's billions or trillions, how much time and energy we expel basically caring for other people. Society is reliant on us doing this work, but it doesn't get paid, does it? So when those pressures increase, I suppose, then it's not surprising that you'll find women falling out of work. But of course, that has other ripple effects on our lives. We then might become financially dependent on a partner. Then if you're in an unhealthy relationship, you become stuck in that relationship, and it has a knock-on ripple effect. And that's why I feel really energized to often talk about quite a lot of different topics, because it's those intersections and connections between all of them that I think we need to really pay close attention to.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't finished watching Adolescence either. I did watch the first episode and I intend to finish watching it this week. I've got two daughters who are 10 and 13, so it's very much playing on my mind. And I do know I need to face into it and, in fact, probably watch it with the 13-year-old.
Mm.
It's interesting because we obviously acknowledge that there's quite a huge gap still in terms of what needs to be done for women in order to effectively retain them in the workforce, in order to ensure that their needs are met, that sort of thing, which is your life's work now. Um, but then at the same time, we have this pushback from young boys in particular around there being too much focus on women to the detriment of men. I'd just be curious to get your thoughts on how we have a balanced conversation about both.
Mm. Well, I think that's a really big question, isn't it? How to do it? Yeah, I remember being at Wow Festival, Women of the World Festival in London some years ago, and sobbing, actually sobbing, listening to some talks about the stats about how many people had felt feminism had gone too far. I did leave with a different lens, actually. And I always remember walking in my sister's kitchen and see it. One of my sisters, got four. But this one's a strident feminist, and on the fridge there was a magnet that said the future is female. And I suddenly looked at that through a different lens, and it was like, well, if I saw the future as male, how would that make me feel? I have a daughter who's 12, and I have a son who's 8. And I'm so grateful to have one of each because it forces me to keep flip-flopping either side. He's very aware of my work, and I'm very mindful that I have to make it feel accessible and applicable and important to him as well. I won this National Diversity Award last year out of the blue, as a positive role model for gender. And it really cemented in my mind something that had been percolating for a couple of years about how to extend my work outside of women, because that's where it started. And yet nothing is going to change unless we can enroll other people and all genders, being mindful that gender is a galaxy in itself, um, in these conversations. And so I have started to extend my work into allyship. I've done sessions that are just for men, anyone that identifies as male, to help try and educate them in a really safe space about the challenges that the females in their lives might be going through. And actually, it's amazing what you can get in those spaces. Like I ran a session for a Japanese company, very senior execs were there. We had 100% attendance, which had never happened before. I literally had someone stood outside the Chinese embassy dialing in because they were so keen to hear it, but weren't really available. Because of course, many of these men will have had wives at home, probably going through this, I guess potentially daughters, depending on their age. And when I said, right, I want you to put in the chat just the first word that comes to mind when you hear the word perimenopause, it was ignorance, 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 ignorance. And what I follow up with is like, great, that's how most women feel. There is no shame in not knowing about these things because we haven't understood them either. And I would apply that to lots of other topics as well, neurodivergence being a prime one. We have because of the systemic gender gaps across society, we haven't understood, the female experience in many areas of life. So we're all learning. So don't worry if you feel like you should know more. We can all go on this journey together. And of course, it's trying to talk about the P word, as I say, the patriarchy, without saying it, because that is still internalized as a personal slight. And I haven't figured that bit out yet. But come back to me in a year, and maybe I will have done.
Season 4 maybe. And one thing we talked about in the discovery call, and you put it so beautifully and elegantly, was the hormonal shift driving career changes, and I think that might be of real interest. Could you explain that for the listeners, because that really aligns with what you've been touching on and how perimenopause is then impacting the women in the workforce?
Yes, the talk that I do on menopause is reframing it as a gift in your life because it is inevitable. We're all going to go through it. And there still can be quite a bit of shame and stigma, I would suggest, around it. But firstly, when you look at a woman's life and her hormones and what's happening, you can see it kind of starts with pretty much nothing. It goes crazy when you're in puberty, which anyone with teenagers and tweens we're fully aware of, and then it kind of levels out in theory as in our supposedly fertile years if you're fortunate enough to be able to have children, and then it fluctuates again in that perimenopausal time until you get to menopause. And I say, first of all, if things are going a little bit wild in your external life, no wonder. Like, this is internally what's happening, this fluctuation all the time. It's no surprising, really, that things are happening in our relationships, in our careers, in our friendships, that we're thinking and feeling differently. On a physiological level, things are happening in ways that they haven't been happening before. Now, estrogen is known as our caregiving hormone. It is highest at that point for a reason, because if we have children, we have to hang around and look after them because they're, unable to do that themselves. So it's critical from a kind of human survival perspective that we have all that estrogen. But that means as it declines, that we do get, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this, an FU energy about us when we go, hang on a minute, I don't know if I'm quite so happy about putting everybody else's needs, and you do see that happen. This is a pivotal time in women's lives where we have a renewed sense of energy. We suddenly wake up, we realize we haven't got any boundaries. We're not in a career that actually fits us anymore. Our relationship doesn't really meet our needs. Like, these friendships don't feel like me. I don't feel like me. Who am I anyway? I don't want to look after these children. And I think that's an amazing energy to harness. This can be, without doubt, and I know from first-hand experience, having 10 hot flushes a day and having panic attacks in the cupboard, like, this can be, and often is, a really challenging time in your life. But it's going to happen anyway. And why not harness the great energy that it brings with it to really transform your life and think about your long-term health, but also your daily quality of life, and make changes to accommodate that.
So for the people that are still in corporate environments, what can businesses do to equip their people, men and women, to be able to support people going through this huge time in their life?
Mm. I think one of the big things is really mainstreaming conversation, so that they don't feel hidden away. That's, I think, a really big part of what I try to bring to the world. And I've realized that's one of the word I've been talking about: destigmatizing or normalizing, and now I'm kind of at mainstreaming. Mainstream it, because it is mainstream. The stat that I like to use about menopause is, yes, we're 51% of the population, but it's 100% of people that are impacted by this, because directly or indirectly, women in your life. If you're not one, then one. And as I've just said, it has a huge ripple effect on how you're going to show up in the world. So if you can create a culture where you enable people to really share what's actually happening for them, give them time and space to recognize what they actually need, because I do believe that we often all have the answers within us. It's just, are we gifted that time, which we're living such a time poor society now, and particularly as women, so that we can advocate. We can share, this is what I need, whether it's like physical environments, whether it's a difference in the way the day is run, whether flexible working. We always come back with that for neurodivergence as well, is like allowing people to work in a way that best accommodates them. And having now the privilege, really, of working for myself and being able to be in an environment that works for me, making sure that I've got natural light, that the temperature is right, that I can wear what I like, that I have headphones on and I can stand up and dance and listen to hardcore techno when I have to focus, and manage my days and have, focus time in the morning and meetings in the afternoon to match with my natural energetic rhythms throughout the day. That's a huge privilege. But that's what we should want for everybody working for us. I'm extending my team, and I want to best understand and know what suits them, because I want to get the best out of them, and they want to be feeling well, happy, heard, validated, understood. And I hope that, really, that when people don't create it, it's actually just an opportunity for those businesses that are going to put that time and energy into supporting people, and you'll get the best talent.
It's interesting what you say about the drop in estrogen levels after menopause, which is obviously what happens. I was reading an article yesterday about the revolution in terms of personal health and longevity, and the fact that theoretically we'll all be living longer. For women, that means we'll be living longer in a post-menopausal state. So therefore, the contributions that we can make to work and to society will happen to a larger degree of our lifespan in that period of time. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about the sort of contributions that women post-menopause can make to businesses or society versus what they potentially make pre.
I mean, the word that came to my mind when you said, what do women later in life bring, was wisdom. I look at myself, I'm turning 43 tomorrow. I don't believe our age should be a stigma and something that we don't talk about. And I look back at my, 23-year-old self, and I feel a lot of empathy for her. That would have been a really difficult time. I didn't really know myself. I'm still overcoming some of these things, but I'm certainly further on the journey of the perfectionism and the people pleasing. I didn't know I was neurodivergent until 2 years ago. I mean, when you discover that in yourself, it literally impacts every single element of your life. So I feel really sorry for that young woman, to be honest, to have been trying to navigate life, never mind work, not understanding my neurotype. And that's why I feel so energized to help people understand it in themselves. So, yes, I think when you get to 40, 50 and beyond, you have probably encountered quite a lot of life's challenges. And with that comes huge resilience and tenacity and strength and, yeah, wisdom. And why would you not want that in your business? You know, those are skills and strengths that every business needs. Yeah.
Another question I wanted to ask you about was there's been quite a lot of talk, particularly in the U.S., around masculine traits within the workplace versus feminine traits in the workplace, and maybe it's time to be more masculine and bring more of that into the work environment. Do you hear any of that in terms of the women that you work with, their feeling around work right now, and the way that there is maybe a more favoritism being put towards male traits, or is that not actually bearing out on the
Mm.
ground in your experience?
Yeah, good question. I haven't heard it loads actually, which is kind of reassuring. The problem I found with that particular story is that so many of us were posting it and just amplifying that story for free. It was like, here's loads of free PR, Mark Zuckerberg. I mean, it just feels like you're playing into their playbook when we all jump on the bandwagon and spend our time talking about it when actually no, not everybody agrees with it, but it suddenly starts to take a whole new energy about it when we give it more airtime than it deserves. So I chose to kind of not partake really in that. And yeah, I try to you shine a light on things that I think we need to be talking about rather than things that I think are just a waste of time to some degree.
So, what are the more hopeful things that you've discovered since you started doing this work? So, the things that you thought were true, you get into doing this work, and then you actually realize, no, actually, things are pretty good in this regard. Where do those topics sit?
Neurodiversity is a good one, I suppose. We're still a long way away from diagnosis rates being equal between genders, and all the research is so binary, and we're only just exploring the intersection with our hormones, which does have a big connection. But that said, it is starting. I was on a panel for Neurodiversity Celebration Week last week, talking about neurodiversity as a community, and I always come back to hope and optimism. I think I gave the example of how we all use plastic bags now, or we don't. You know how we used to always just we'd use millions of plastic bags. Now the whole pretty much everyone will take them to the supermarket because we don't want to pay 30p for one. You know, it's a tiny thing, but it's actually a big behavioral change that's happened on a mass level. And it gives me hope that there are ways we can have these catalysts of change in society if we can all get on board with it. And neurodiversity has been around, it's coined by Judy Slinger in Australia in the 1990s. It's not necessarily a new concept, but it does feel like it's now finally being a bit more mainstream conversation. And I think with that comes additional self-awareness. I'm definitely not advocating everyone needs to go and rush and get a diagnosis or an assessment. That's not it. But this is really about, for me, it's about increasing our self-awareness of ourselves. So like in terms of our hormones, in terms of the realities of relationships, in terms of our financial literacy or confidence or, realistic pension pot, you know, and neurodivergence as well. If because of these gender gaps, I feel like we've been done a disservice, not understanding ourselves enough. But there are lots of positive changes across all of those areas. I think, as I say, looping back to the beginning, really, the key is how can we enroll all genders in conversation? Because if this is just a woman's issue with women talking about it, we're never going to fix it. It needs to be plastic bag mainstreamed. This is a challenge for all of us. And hopefully, I don't know, somehow this adolescence conversation might be able to play a positive role in that we can all get on board and understand. I don't think anyone hopefully would ever say it's only women that has issues, but we can somehow level the playing field a little bit here and explore it all collectively.
Just on the neurodiversity piece, you mentioned earlier that ADHD is almost mainstream, but you feel that autism's been left behind. Could you shine a bit of a light on autism for us and for the listeners? And what would you like to see change, but also what are some of the things that we may not know? What needs to be brought to light?
Yeah, it feels it's great that ADHD, people feel happier to identify as being ADHD. And I say, for being explicit and explaining how I think language is important, I personally like to say I am an ADHD rather than I have ADHD. I think it pathologizes it, it makes it feel like a disease that I might have, whereas of course I was born this way. This is part of my identity. Um, Autism, I think there's still, it feels like there's still quite a lot of fear around it. We've still got Rain Man in our heads, we've got white boys with trains. They are like the automatic associations still. And that's, I guess, because we don't have enough other faces to connect with when we hear about it. That is changing. You have women speaking out openly about this far more ever in history. Imagine that we are in a pivotal moment, and I do feel so grateful to be alive at this point in time. My daughter is autistic, and I'm very determined to be changing how we talk and think about it so that she is brought up in a world that doesn't look at her differently for that fact. I'm certain that I'm autistic, the more and more I learn about it. And I'm going to be proud of it because that's who I am. That's how I am sitting here today having this conversation, is because of the way that I see the world, the way that I can have deep empathy, the way I can connect, walk into a room of strangers and come out with friends. It's and actually I've worked with Hatch Enterprise, which is a charity for marginalised social entrepreneurs, and I worked with them last year on their first cohort for disabled and neurodivergent entrepreneurs. And it's the UK's first. They just posted about it yesterday, actually. And they were inundated with people wanting to be on that. And I think that the combination of entrepreneurship and neurodivergence and disability is actually a brilliant one, because if you are neurodivergent or disabled, you have to work a lot harder in this world in order to get through every day, frankly. And what you need for entrepreneurship, and probably lots of jobs, but particularly entrepreneurship, is great strength, unwavering self-belief, and resilience and tenacity. And these people have it in bucket loads just to survive their days. And given, there will be additional funding cuts potentially tomorrow, that's only going to be exasperated. And my hope when these things become harder for people is that we just find a way to actually work collectively together to make more change quicker.
So, if you could wave your magic wand and change organizations to be more accepting of people with ADHD and autism, what would you tackle first?
Yes. A lot of it comes down to trust, I think. I think it's about a deep understanding of what these neurotypes can look like. And of course, there's so many different iterations. You can't say one person. That's such a classic thing to say, but it's so true. You can't say you are ADHD and then you know exactly what that means for that person. But a deep recognition and understanding that we are all different. I like the phrase that you should look beyond the behavior to the mindset of someone. If you encounter someone on a bus and they bash into you and swear at you and it's their fault, rather than just being irritated by them, think for a moment, like, what might have been happening in their day for them to behave like that? And I add to that, think about the neurotype. If somebody isn't making eye contact in the way that you would expect, if they're expecting questions in an interview before they arrive, if they haven't understood the joke because they've taken it literally, like, consider for a moment before you make a judgment what might be happening for that person, what their lens might be in life, what potential trauma they might have experienced throughout their life, having been so misunderstood. And that leads to, just walking through work and life with a greater sense of empathy. I think parent carers, we have which I identify as one, having advocated for my daughter for 12 years, we have an extraordinarily difficult job in this country advocating for our children. There are broken education and healthcare systems which literally add an entire job to a parent carer's life. Another one that incidentally is unpaid. And hardly anybody knows about this apart from all of us that are doing it. But we don't talk about it because it feels too, scary to talk about publicly. My hopeful message is always that it makes a warrior of you, but it has a huge impact disproportionately on the primary carers who will be women, on our ability to progress in our careers, in our financial independence, in our physical and mental and emotional well-being. We absolutely have to be thinking about our children. And as an ambassador for Amaze, I sat in an AGM and asked the people in the higher positions of the education health system, are you actually thinking about the parents? Are you thinking about the mothers? Because 98% of this room is women, because we are the ones thinking about it. And the answer was basically no, we're not. We're not thinking about the implications because there is a huge economic ripple effect when you don't meet a child's needs in their school and the woman is left advocating for them. Often
Right.
children leave school, they can't attend school, and who's picking up the pieces? Now, I'm not saying it's all women, and I'm not saying it's all mothers, and hopefully in many homes it's quite equal, but quite often it's not. So we really have to shine a light on that. And employers need to better understand, and it's not their fault, but they need to understand the reality of people's lives behind closed doors.
I completely relate to that. I have a daughter with ADHD. I've been there in the trenches fighting for things that should not be so difficult to get. But also, it reminds me a few years ago, I worked for an organization that was trying to become more inclusive of autistic people. And so I worked with the National Autistic Society, who came in and very helpfully provided some advice around what we could do in order to make it a more inclusive environment. And a couple of the things that stood out for me is, first of all, they made that point, which you just made, Jess, which is if you know one person with autism, you know one person with autism. So effectively, the spectrum is so large, and these are all individuals. And so how someone shows up with autism is largely different from how the next person will. But the second piece that I thought was really important and has stuck with me is that actually what you do as a workplace to become more inclusive for people with autism is how you become a workplace that's more inclusive for everybody. So actually what you're doing is not catering to a specific marginalized group. What you're doing is creating an environment that is actually a better baseline for everyone who wants to access work in that place. So we're talking about things like removing idiomatic expressions or abbreviations or things like that from the work environment in a way that is just more respectful for different ways that people process information. It's not a difficult thing to do. So actually, in some ways, it's funny when we have these discussions around diversity and inclusion initiatives and stripping them off websites and things like that are happening in the US. Actually, the solution to all of this, and maybe this will be eventually the positive outcome because I am an optimist, is that actually what we'll come back to is something that is just a general good baseline for how we do business for people moving forward, and is less about focusing on how we address the issues and needs of all those individual groups that we're trying to include. Maybe that's optimistic.
No, I think that's what will hopefully turn the needle, right? Is that will move the needle is if we recognize it will benefit everybody, then maybe people will be more inclined. That and just getting more diverse minds and bodies in all the places that decisions are being made, so that you have that lens when you're making those decisions and you recognize there are a variety of needs.
So when you think about your daughter and her future of work, what do you hope will be true for her as she grows into becoming a productive member of society?
That her strengths will be clearly known by her. She will be able to share those with ease and they will be acknowledged and needed and recognized. I mean, that is the same for all of us. They talk about the spiky profile, and I say it's kind of a spikier profile. No one's flatlining as being amazing at everything. Some of us are great at and not so great at different things, and that is the case for everybody. So we don't need to make us feel like worse about it. Yes, we just need a little bit more help. And I think this concept of a mind ramp is a helpful visual idea. We all recognize that somebody in a wheelchair needs a physical ramp to access a room. ADHDers, autistics, lots of dyslexics, lots of neurodivergent people need a mind ramp to make work accessible. And if we just integrated that as a standard, the way we do with, walls and lights in buildings, then, it would feel completely different. And businesses would also be far more productive. Think how many unproductive people we've probably got sat in offices across the country because they don't understand the neurodivergence, or they know it and they can't talk about it, and they're in an environment that doesn't cater for it. I mean, it's just loads of wasted time and energy, which
Mm.
nobody wants.
I've never heard the term mind ramp, and I love that. And I think I mentioned it in a previous episode. We've launched a This Is Me campaign all about people belonging, and I shared my journey of being a dyslexic thinker, and that don't send me a block of text. It will just I won't see what needs to be done. I'm overwhelmed. Like bullet point, structured headings, and be really clear on what the call to action is, and just simple shifts. Like so many people are doing it already. I'm getting tons of emails of bullet points. Hilarious. But it's little things like that. And you mentioned one earlier. An autistic person may need the questions in advance to an interview to help them. These little snippets of information that are we thinking about it for mind ramps for different people? It's amazing. Like, really amazing.
So you mentioned the need to become more neuro-curious. Can you tell us a little bit about what we should all be doing in order to potentially answer some of those questions for ourselves?
Yeah, I think curiosity is the key. Uh, Obviously, not everybody may well identify with being neurodivergent, but it's highly likely, almost certain, that you're going to have someone in your world that is. So having a curiosity and taking the initiative, I suppose, to deepen your understanding and awareness of what some of these neurotypes are, how they might show up in the world. Change your Insta feed or your LinkedIn feed. Follow some people that are in this space that you might not normally be listening to just help gently educate yourself. Uh, and I think have a curiosity with those people around you who are neurodivergent. So rather than make assumptions or judgments or feel like you can't say anything at all, uh, asking questions, to better understand will probably help that person as well, because we're all a bit of a work in progress. I don't think I know any person that has fully understood their neurobiology and they know exactly all of their needs and every little bit. Most people are peeling back the layers, peeling back the masking, going on this journey of self-discovery, which I think is just wonderful, and actually being asked questions about, how do you experience this, or how might this be for you, or what feels easy or tricky for you, in a way where it, increases people feeling seen and validated. I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, it's great. I've actually had a few people in my life who recently I found out were autistic. I've just sort of dropped it in conversation after years of knowing them. Oh, I'm on the spectrum. And it's so funny how quickly everything just falls into place. I'm wondering, would you advise someone to disclose their neurodiversity in an application for a job upfront?
I think it's too context dependent. I mean,
Yeah.
it depends on the environment. I suppose instinctively I would say yes, because if they turn you down, great, it's a near miss for you. You don't want to work for someone that's going to
Hmm.
say they don't want that in you. So yeah, my view and hope, I suppose, is that people will accept you for all elements of you, and you're always looking for the right fit. I only work with values aligned people. I don't want to work with people that don't fit that for me, because it's not going to work for either of us. So yeah, yeah, it's hard to say for everybody, but intuitively I'd say yeah.
What's on the horizon for you then? What's coming up, and what are the next things you'd like to put your energy and time towards moving forward?
Yeah, it's definitely all about NeuroCurios. It's the first time I've brought back community events in 5 years, and so it's quite a big undertaking. We're going to record it as well, so that if you miss it, you can watch it afterwards. It's hopefully going to be a series of 4, because there are there's so many elements to this. This is going to be like a 101, an introduction, and the hope is that it's bringing all genders. So, I want non-binary, trans, all AFAB individuals to feel welcome, because I think they get excluded from these conversations a lot. Um, and I really want people to bring the men or the males in their lives as well, the dads, the partners, the husbands, the bosses. I want the teams coming. They know that they've got one neurodivergent woman in their team potentially, and this is a way of showing some sort of solidarity, increasing that, as I say, curiosity and empathy by better understanding it. But yeah, we'll hopefully go on, if I have the energy, Alice, then we'll look at it, the intersection with our health and hormones, because they're realizing that, for example, you're more likely to have encountered PMDD, which I'm realizing I will have done. And in our workplaces, as we've touched on today, which is another separate matter, and in our families, that ND family connections, because so much of it is heritable, and often we will discover our children are neurodivergent and spend years, like I did, going, no, it's you, no, it's not, definitely not me. Oh, it's me. Hang on a minute. But really, from a sensory perspective, I want to get an OT along, occupational therapist with sensory integration experience, to really acknowledge the importance of us being able to co-regulate our children, but having to really understand our own nervous systems first. That's that. And just bringing my work to more businesses. Yeah, bringing more affirming work, and if I can increase my work in the allyship space, that is another. It's high up the agenda for me on this year.
Real. And where can people find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Jess Rad, and the Womenhood page. It's women, not woman, and Instagram as well. The women_hood, and the website is thewomenhood.com. There's a wait list for the NeuroCurios events there now.
Well, we'll pop all of that in the show notes, and nothing less to say other than thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Really interesting conversation. Really appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And thank you to everyone for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the episode. If you have any Work is Weird moments to share, please find us on LinkedIn and let us know what they were. In the meantime, have a wonderfully weird week, and we look forward to seeing you next time.